My name is Justin, and I'm an addict. And thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts, I am sober one day at a time since June 19th, 2015. And for that, I am beyond grateful. Welcome to the RECO12 speaker meeting. We are an organization whose addictions include alcohol, drugs, lust and sex, food and gambling, just to name a few. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to learn the similarities of addiction and to gain tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. We invite recovering addicts with at least 1 year sobriety and who are actively working their recovery in their respective fellowships to share their experience, strength, and hope on a live Zoom webinar each Friday at noon Central Time for 20 to 25 minutes. Then we, the live audience, get the opportunity to ask questions of the speaker for another 20 to 25 minutes. If you are hearing this meeting in recorded podcast form and would like to participate as a live audience member in the future, please go to www.RECO12.com, that's RECO12.com, to learn more and to submit your email address there to receive weekly invitations. RECO12 is a self-supporting service, and we appreciate your help in keeping us working our Step 12 in this manner. We gratefully accept contributions to help cover the costs of the Zoom platform, podcast platform, web hosting, and administrative costs. To contribute, you can go to RECO12.com/support, or you can click the link to PayPal in the chat of the live meeting or in the show notes. And when you contribute, please specify the meeting number. This is meeting number 51. Last week's meeting was with Jackie C., and her topic was dynamic recovery. It was a very uplifting and informative meeting. If you missed hearing that solid meeting or any other meeting we've done, you can listen to them in podcast form by searching for RECO12 Speaker Meeting Podcast on virtually any podcast platform that is out there. Or you can go to the RECO12 website and find it under the link podcast. Quick favor, if you're listening to this on your podcast platform, please hit pause right now and go and rate and review RECO12. It really helps get this message out to more addicts who suffer and more who want diverse speakers about their own experience, strength, and hope. Because of our great speakers, our live audience, and our listeners, RECO12 has now been listened to over 15,000 times in 64 countries around the world. I think that's pretty cool. All right. One more word about our speakers before we introduce today's speaker. When we line up a speaker for a meeting, we ask them to seek guidance on what and how to present so that they can reflect the light they have been given. That light will inspire hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now let's introduce our guest speaker for today, Arlina A., whose topic will be making new sober friends. All right, Arlina, here's a little bit about her. This is her bio. Sober since April 23rd, 1997. Awesome. From drugs and alcohol. Married since 97 to a sober spouse, 2 amazing boys, and an English bulldog called Teddy. She's from San Jose, California, but now lives in Boise, Idaho area. And she is also the host of the One Day at a Time podcast, which I really enjoy listening to. Her Q&A and format is really informative. I like the way it sounds, and I listen to it nearly every week. Now, Arlina, take it away. The floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Justin. My heart is full knowing that you listen to my podcast. Woo! Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. It's always such an honor to be able to share my experience, strength, and hope. I was told that I would not regret my past or wish to shut the door on it, and that my experiences could be transformed into information that could help others, whether we connect because y'all get my kind of crazy, right? Or just that, you can connect to, if you experience anything that I felt, that maybe you can get sober too. And I have been sober a long time. I don't think I'm any different than anyone else. I just did what I was told. I received the gift of desperation, as they say, when I first showed up to the room. So I was, what's funny is I always wanted to be somebody else, right? And when I showed up to Alcoholics Anonymous, they told me all you had to do was change everything. And I was like, sign me up, because I didn't want anything that I had. So no issue there. But I'll start at the beginning. I think it's always so important to talk about, family of origin and childhood, because that's how the stage is set. and now as an adult, as somebody who is saturated into the recovery community and fascinated with things like neuroscience and positive psychology. And I just wanted to, I'm somebody who needs to understand why. Why did this happen? Why does my brain work the way that it does? And what can I do about it? Right? There's something that we can do about this. Although I am powerless over alcohol, I'm not helpless. I lost the ability to choose whether I was going to drink and smoke weed. That was my other thing. Add in a little love addiction. I like, my tagline is that if it was in a bottle, a bag, or blue jeans, I was doing it. Anything to change the way that I felt. And I just recently actually started going to a different program where they address love addiction. And that has been really eye-opening. I interviewed this lady who has 11 years in this other program, and the way she was phrasing some of her distractions, I think of addiction as distractions. And the purpose of distraction or obsession is to take you away from whatever it is that you don't want to feel, right? And typically there are things that I don't want to feel because I don't know how to process them to resolution. So anyway, I feel like I'm kind of jumping ahead, but what I wanted to share with you is a little bit about what it was like when I was growing up, because that set the stage for me. My parents are very nice people. Dad is from Kentucky, so I will occasionally lapse into some sort of Southern drawl, which makes no sense because I grew up in Sunnyvale, California. And my mother is from Mexico City. I do not have a Mexican accent, so there's no rhyme or reason to my speech pattern. But all this to say that, both my parents had a pretty significant religious upbringing. I've been told that on my father's side, there's 400 years of ministers, that I qualify for something called the Daughters of the American Revolution, which means I had ancestors in the Civil War or something. And on my mother's side, we got here like yesterday. My mom was the first foreign exchange student at Klamath Falls, Oregon High School when she was like 14 years old. She's in her like late 70s now, but it's so funny. She still has her strong Mexican accent. She's adorable. I didn't always like her as much as I do now, though. But all this to say, I grew up super churched, lots of religion. On daddy's side, it was like, praise Jesus. And on mom's side, it was, ay Dios mío, gracias a Dios. Like, oh dear God, please help me with this child, is kind of how I felt she used her religion. But she wasn't actually very religious, but she did go to church because my dad liked it. And then there was a couple of things that happened in my childhood that really set the tone for how I felt about myself, right? What my value was, what I was capable of, those kinds of things, my self-esteem. I was sexually abused by a neighbor and my parents' divorce. And those two things together did a number on my psyche, right? These things were happening that made me feel like I wasn't a good person, that I was bad, that I was dirty. And I was really young. I was about 5 years old when it started. And it was another child. So, but an older child. People don't really talk about that kind of thing a lot, but I think it happens a lot, and I know that it's easily dismissed as childhood curiosity, but the pattern was predatory, and it made me feel like I was a terrible person. And growing up in the church, I wanted to be good. And I used to always ask God to fix me. I felt like I was broken. There was something wrong with me. And I never felt that God fixed me. I kept feeling frustrated and I hated who I was. And I wanted to be good. I really did, but I just couldn't. And I gave up after a while. I decided that if I couldn't be good, that I was going to be good at being bad. And that's just sad, but the core message in that was that I thought I was bad. Right. And, there was a level of perfectionism that I learned through the church. There was a lot of forgiveness also, but it was under the context that I was this wretched sinner. It just, doesn't make sense to me now. However, and it didn't feel like there was a lot of people being transparent or vulnerable about it was okay to ask for prayers if you had cancer or somebody you loved was sick, but there was no, can I swear on this? There was no.
If it falls into the natural conversation, yes, feel free.
I mean, it's natural for me. Then anyway, there was no room for, I'll just say, being a jerk. There was nobody saying, hey, I'm cheating on my wife and I hate who I am. Nobody said that. Nobody said, oh my gosh, I'm addicted to pornography, or I'm seeing hookers, or I'm drinking too much, I'm beating my wife, I'm being cruel to my siblings. There was none of that. I heard none of that. Like none of like the real life ways that, character defects like play out, right? I'm gossiping, I'm shopping, like none of that. I didn't hear any of it at church. And so anyway, I don't know about all that. What I know now looking back is that the teachings were about ideals that we could aspire to. But there wasn't a lot of empathy. I didn't sense a lot of empathy. But what I learned about ideals are a mental construct. It's like the horizon. The horizon is a mental construct. You could walk towards the horizon, but you'll never get there, right? And so that's what I learned, that these, the principles that they were trying to teach were about. It was a mental construct. It was never meant for me to use that as standard or as a measuring stick to beat myself with, right? So so my parents divorced. I'll just go into the drinking stuff because that's kind of where all the disaster started. So I have an older sister, and she and I were left home alone. I was about 8 or 9 when I had my first drink. At 8 or 9, I hated who I was to the point where I felt the need to drink, which makes me feel really sad. I have 2 boys that are grown now. One's 17 and one's almost 21. And it breaks, when my boys were that age, it broke my heart to look at them and think, oh, that little person, that little girl inside me felt the need to do that at that age. But I did because I was never taught how to cope with my feelings. After my dad left, he was like the nurturing one in the family, and he was like a former Marine, and he was like a Lockheed NASA government guy. But oddly enough, he was like the nurturing one. And my mom, I felt she had like 2 feelings growing up. Her 2 predominant feelings were either happy or really pissed off. And I felt like she saved the happy face for the outside world, which meant that I had 2 primary feelings, which were guilty and wrong. That's how I felt growing up. I never felt like my mom really liked me. And, and then I have an older sister who had mental illness, and I'm jumping all over the place. Hopefully you can follow. But anyway, so my older sister and I were home alone. Mom went out on a date, nothing crazy. She just left the house for dinner. It's fine. And back then, with an older sister, it's reasonable. But anyway, I decided that I would drink some of the booze that was in the cabinet. It was like in this dusty bottle. Somebody must have left it after a party or something. I don't even know why it was there. I never saw my parents drink. But I decided to drink, and I'll never forget the way it burned my lips, the way it burned all the way down. And then when it hit bottom, that warmth that spread through my whole body. And all of a sudden, everything that I hated about who I was lifted. Like all the self-hatred, the self-consciousness, the insecurities, the guilt and the shame that I felt, suddenly everything was removed. And all that was left was this good feeling. And the juxtaposition of those 2 feelings was burned in my psyche forever. And it started to set off this twisted dopamine reward system, right? Like we started talking about a little bit of brain chemistry. It's like you do something, dopamine is actually released in your brain after you take an action. It works like a save button, so that when you do something and you like it, you get that feeling, your brain remembers that experience. So burned in my psyche forever. I used to say that I chased that feeling until I got sober. But truth be told, I still like that feeling of guiltless, shameless, happy, not self-centered, just like that joy and happiness in the present moment. I still like that feeling. So I chase that in a variety of ways, but I just don't need to put drugs or alcohol into my body to do that. Netflix is another thing, but I'm not going to talk about that. I have other kinds of distractions. Currently watching Game of Thrones for like the 5th time. Anyway, side note. So all that to say that when I ingest alcohol, my body, that's how my body responds. And then the price tag. The price tag of that first drink was that I threw up everywhere, and my sister had to clean me up and put me to bed. And that began our alcoholic codependent relationship. Now, I'm not saying at age 8 or 9, I started drinking on a daily basis. However, that experience is sort of indicative of how I drank. So from my first drink to my last drink was on my 25th birthday. And I had many sort of what I called episodes during that time, because I could never predict who was going to show up once I started drinking. I had like these alter egos. It was either Wimpy Wendy or Badass Betsy, because I was either crying or fighting. Turns out there was a third alter ego that I identified later, which was, I just call her Slutty Karen. She always joined the party at some point because everybody loves Slutty Karen, literally and figuratively. That was just, that was just part. Sometimes I remember some of my experiences of getting loaded was like, I'd wake up the next morning and go, oh my God, that's not my sailing. Anybody relate? Anybody? So yeah, I was not living in alignment with the values that I grew up with. And I wanted to be different, and I just couldn't be. And that was like the powerlessness and the unmanageability. The powerlessness was I was not able to control how I behaved once I started drinking. The unmanageability was the effects of my behavior. So we're talking about cause and effect, right? And I like to think of it in terms of cause and effect instead of right and wrong, because I really believe that everybody's just doing the best that they can with the information that they have, right? I didn't know that at that young age when I started drinking, what would happen to my life. I didn't have any examples of it. I'm telling you, even if I did, I probably would have made the same choices because I was in so much pain. I didn't have any other way of coping with my feelings other than to distract, deny, disassociate, and treat it with drugs and alcohol. And man, my teen years were rough. I used to say, I've often said that if, to some extent, drugs and alcohol saved my life, because if I had to feel everything that I felt, I don't know that I would have survived. I barely survived as it was. Like I hated who I was for so long. I had a very hard time making and keeping friends. I just felt so weird and different, which is polar opposite to what my life is about now. I'm surrounded by friends and family and a really intense, amazing support network, which I've had to utilize recently. But all this to say that by the end, I was 25 years old. I had alienated all my family and friends. I was in a sales job and I was not doing well. And I really wanted to be different. I spent about 2 years in the self-help section at Barnes & Noble trying to think my way into right living. Turns out after I got to the program, I learned to live my way into right thinking. But, that's a little foreshadowing. What ended up happening is I was in an outside sales position and 2 of my customers were in the program. And as I saw it, my job was to make friends and share my life. And I did that. I was 22 at the time. And when I first started the sales job, and by the time I was 24, that's when these guys that I met started sharing their experience, strength, and hope with me. And I didn't know that that's what was happening, but that's what was happening. And they started breaking off little chunks of information. Like, if you keep doing what you're doing, you'll keep getting what you're getting. It seemed very impersonal, right? It wasn't like a character attack. It wasn't like I'm a bad person. It didn't have anything to do with being moral. It's just like cause and effect. I think the one thing that really blew my mind was that Einstein quote about, you can't solve a problem at the same level of consciousness that created the problem, right? So that I was like, oh, damn. That led me to feel like I needed to rely on someone else's thinking because my thinking was flawed and I didn't know where the error was in my logic at the end of the day. So, and I wanted to be different. And they said, "Oh, you have to do the work." And I was like, "The work? What's the work? Tell me what the work is." And so they started. So Mitch and Randy were these two guys that took me, kind of ushered me into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And Randy was doing stuff like kind of breaking down the first few steps. Mitch actually physically took me to my very first meeting. And I remember choking on the words anonymity. That's how you identify the newcomers. Ask them to read something, reread the literature. And I was terrified. People would talk about the newcomer, and I just assumed I was so self-centered. What's funny? When I showed up, I was so self-centered, but incapable of self-examination. I needed an actual process to help me to do the self-examination. And I was so desperate to be sober. I was willing to do anything that they told me to. And they said that I had to get a female sponsor. And I was terrified. I was terrified that I was going to have to work with the women, because I hung out with the boys. Don't you know? I was like a tomboy. I could drink most men twice my size under the table. I had such tolerance. There's such a weird ego thing about that. It just means you're drunk. It's not a good thing. It just means you built up your tolerance. It's not a good thing. Yeah, what I value today is vastly different from what I used to value. But totally self-centered, incapable of self-examination until I was introduced to this process. And in order to move through that process, it needed to be facilitated by a sponsor. And they said I needed to get a female one. And now I understand why. So anyway, I kept hearing about this ominous 4-step, and I was terrified that I kept hearing about people doing steps 1, 2, and 3 and then relapsing. And I was all, hell no, that is not going to be me. I will not. I was so scared I was going to relapse that I was willing to work with another woman. So the way I chose my sponsor is I met this woman who remembered my name the second time she met me. And it was as if the clouds parted and the sun was shining, and it was like, oh, the angels are singing, this is the one. And so, how I asked her to be my sponsor? I said, would you listen to my inventory? And, I'll never forget what she said. It just leveled me, because she looked me in the eye and she said, it would be my honor. And I was like, really? She goes, but we're going to start with step 1. So that's what we did. She met with me she'd be like, meet me at here's your homework. Step 1 homework: define powerlessness and unmanageability and find examples of those in your life, as many as you can think of. And I would do all my writing exercises. We'd read step 1 together. She read the book with me. I read, out of the Alcoholics Anonymous book and out of the 12 and 12 book. I love both those books. Magical. And I would read her my homework. We'd set a date, and I'd go there and I'd wait, and she showed up every damn time. I was always surprised that she was there. I don't know why, but I was like, oh my God, she showed up. We're doing this. And they said to bring to the program the same intensity with which you sought drugs and alcohol. So I was like, oh, I'm a very resourceful person. So I brought all my energy and resources and skills to this process, and I don't do anything in half measures anyway. So I was like, okay, that's fine. So we met and did a step a week. The 4 steps took me a little bit longer just because there was so much to go through. But it was the first time. And I don't know why people, come to think of it, I don't know why people are so resistant to doing the 4-step. It's license to bitch. You get to complain and you have a captive audience. Right? It's license. It's like, please bring it on. Be as petty as you possibly can. Who is that asshole that hurt you? What did they do to you? You tell me. I'm listening. What's happening? And so, and I would just tell her all these things, and I could see it in her eyes. She got my kind of crazy. I did that stuff too. There was a lot of that. Oh, here's what I did. And I was like, wow. But it was the first time in my life that I was able to sort stuff out. Like, what was mine? What wasn't mine? I could let go of the things that weren't mine so I could bear the weight of what was. How was big? That was so big for me. I learned that in my family that we were taking inappropriate responsibility for each other and not enough responsibility for ourselves. right? I was like in this victim mode, but I was also trying to save and control my sister. She had some mental illness, and my mom was like, she came to me when I was 14 and she was like, oh, we have to save your sister. And I was like, oh my God, maybe this is a way I can get my mom to love me. I didn't think that at the time, but that's what registered in my psyche. If I can fix my sister, then maybe my mom will like me. Maybe she'll love me and accept me, right? Maybe she'll approve of me. Because I had that not good enough thing to my core, to my core. And so I was always trying to fix my sister, and bitch wasn't that right. So it would make me crazy. So what I learned is that my locus of control was outside myself. I needed people, places, and things outside of myself. I was seeking external validation. For those of us who are self-centered, we seek outside ourselves for that validation, looking for evidence of am I okay? Is there anything I'm doing that's okay? And so yeah, we use people to help us feel like we're okay. And that's definitely what I did. And I saw that in the inventory. It was like this pattern. And in the way I showed up in romantic relationships was the same. I had all these hopes and expectations and hopes and dreams and fantasies, and I would just try to hang them on different people. I never allowed the experience of somebody else to just unfold. I was trying to identify my wants and needs through other people. I didn't really care about who you really were. I was like, are you going to meet my needs? That's how I approached it. That's how my thinking was. And it wasn't really about, what could I do? How could I be of service? It was more like, what can I get from you? How do I use you to validate myself so that I can just survive? Anyway, I did all 12 steps. I started doing service almost right away because, for me, my self-esteem was so low. They told me if I wanted to improve the level of my self-esteem, I needed to do esteemable acts. And so service was in my mind still today is the fastest way, stop doing the bad stuff, stop hurting people, stop stealing, whatever. But when we help somebody else, that's when we actually realize that we have it to give. And it's not lost on me that we are kind of obligated to share our experience, strength, and hope, right? And as we speak it, words are powerful. Words are like things. They carry images and feelings that transmit energy. And when I speak from my heart, like that's how I connect with other people. And when I can tell when someone else is speaking from their heart because I feel it, right? When someone's trying to sound good or they're coming from a place of ego, I don't connect as much. And I'm not trying to judge anybody. I feel like we're all just doing the best that we can, but I just experience people differently when they speak from their heart. And so that's what I try to do too. I go to my head a lot because I like to try to figure things out, but it's part of my practice to try to buck my default mode network. In neuroscience, they have this term called your default mode network. It's your brain is made up of neurons that are connected, that trigger images and emotions. They say the issues are in the tissues. It's a mind-body connection. But that's that was my like a computer operating system. I have a set operating system. And as I try to rewire my brain and break out of that default mode network, things like all my doubts and fears come up. My subconscious mind is actually trying to protect me. It wants me in this sort of, if we all have like this thermostat, we don't get too high, we don't get too low. We kind of stay in like this comfort zone, right? But our comfort zone, like I used to say, like drugs and alcohol, it used to be my savior, but it became my executioner, right? At a certain time, the price tag was just too high. It was costing me everything and I had to give it up. And so I had to try to, really what we're talking about is a way to reprocess negative emotions that we experience. We're trying to resolve the past, make amends, make things right. Amends, I learned, was not about it. Apology is important. A recognition of harms caused is important, but the other piece of that is equally as important. It's what can I do to make it right? Right? Making restitution one way or another, whether it's living amends, financial amends, or whatever. That was really important. And then 10, 11, 12, the maintenance steps, as they're referred to, prayer and meditation, it's a continual well, when I first got it, I was going to say it's a continual brainwashing, which is not wrong in a positive way, right? I remember when I first got sober, I was dating this guy. I call him pre-Bob. My husband's name is Bob. I call him pre-Bob. I was dating pre-Bob. And pre-Bob was saying, I think these people at those meetings, classes, he called them classes. I think those people at the classes that you're going to are brainwashing you. And I know he meant it as an insult, but I was like, yeah, that's exactly what's happening. My brain is needed some washing. And so it's so funny. I like do all this work to raise my level, my self-esteem, the prayer, meditation, the sorting out of my past, allowing for my family. I mean, God, I am so high maintenance. There's so much work that I have to do to like just stay right. But the 10, 11, and 12, it's like you wouldn't go to the gym once and expect to stay in shape forever, right? So the 10, 11, 12 is helping me to maintain this condition, like physical, mental, emotional condition, right? We can change our conditioning. We can rewire our brains, and then it requires some maintenance, right? And so that's what the 10, 11, and 12 is for me. And I have had spiritual experiences. And later in my recovery, I've really been obsessed with all this science stuff. And I realized, it is a program of evidence. The big book talks about that. And it kind of brings me some relief. Like I just can't figure out the God thing. It has evolved so many times I've been sober for 27 years. It has like we're always evolving. We're either evolving or devolving, right? And I would rather stay on the evolving part. But at the end of the day, it's like we don't need to have faith. We have evidence. You are evidence. I am evidence that this program works, right? It works if you work it. It's a cliche, but it's actually true. Cliches are cliches for a reason. And so the maintenance of my spiritual condition is not only in practice working with other people or with a higher power, but people, like God works in my life through people. And so that's why I wanted the topic to be about making new sober friends. And I'm going to give you a very practical method of making new friends, because I hear that a lot in people. It's like, well, how do I find sober people? Like usually if you're drinking, you're trying to get sober, everybody drinks. Our society, our culture is so alcohol heavy. It's weird if you don't drink, right? Like I spent the last 10 years in high-tech sales, working at the enterprise level, and they would bring alcohol into the workplace. I remember one day I was end of quarter, end of year, my boss lined up shots on my cube wall, and I'm like, oh, damn, I need to get out of here. I mean, I don't feel the urge to drink, but it just makes me feel so weird, like a fish out of water, like I just don't belong, and I hate that feeling. But I do have a place where I do belong. And here's the myth. If you don't know how to make friends in recovery, here's what you do. You start going to meetings and collect phone numbers. And then I'm going to ask you to do what is called, I call it willingness calls. I don't even know where I got it from. I call it willingness calls. I'm willing to reach out of my comfort zone and check in on somebody else. So here's the format of the willingness call. I call somebody and I say, hey, I was just thinking about you. Just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. And people go, oh, you're thinking about me. I love it when I get a call and someone's like, oh, you're thinking about me. I'm so important. I feel so valued. So you call, you check in, you see how they're doing. And then what's going on in your world today? And they share a little something about what's going on with them. And then you share a little something about what's going on with you, right? That's it. And sometimes you can preface the call by saying, I only have 5 minutes. Like if you don't want to get into a long conversation with someone, be like, hey, I just have 5 minutes, but I just was thinking about you and wanted to call and check in on you. And then the deal is that if you pick like 5 different people and you make one phone call a day, let's say you pick 7 people, you call one person a day and do a check-in. Pretty soon you have 7 people that you're current with. Right. And when the shit hits the fan, which it will, you will already be in the habit of picking up the phone. I guarantee you, if you don't call when you feel good, you will not want to call when you feel bad. Guaranteed. Everybody's heard about the 1,000-pound phone. That is why you are not in the habit of picking up the phone when you're vulnerable and sad and isolated. Like for me, when I'm sad and hurt, like I want to isolate. I want to run away and hide. It's not my natural instinct to pick up the phone and ask for help. I think I'm close on time, but what I'll say is that most people, when I present this exercise to them, they say, well, I don't want to bother anybody. But what I'll tell you is that people love getting phone calls They really do. I mean, in this day and age, I should probably update, text first so they don't think it's a spam call, right? Text first, especially if they don't have you on their phone, but text first, say, hey, I just want to do a quick check-in. Are you free for a minute? But anyway, so that's how you make friends in recovery. You just be a friend. That's all. How are you? Here's something about what's going on in me. That's it. And just nurture those relationships and pay attention. I'll tell you, not everyone's going to call you back. Not everybody is going to want to be your friend. Pay attention to the people who reach back out. Those are the people you want to invest in. And if you make 2 or 3 phone calls to someone and they never call you back, release them with love. We don't got to be mad about it. Just they're not your person. That's okay, right? Go find your people. There are millions of people in this program who get the concept of sharing and connecting in the way that we do. So I really hope that helps. Thank you so much for giving me some airtime. I obviously love talking about this, and I could talk about it forever, but I'll just stop here.
Oh, thank you so much, Arlina. That was awesome. I really appreciated your vulnerability, your sharing of your story, and the pointers there at the end. We have several questions that have come in, and we'll get to those here in the next few minutes. Reminder to those in our live audience, if you have additional questions that you'd like to ask Arlina, you can type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your screen. Looks like 2 speech bubbles laying over each other. And we'll get right into these questions here. First one is from Corey. Corey says, you discussed how your ego or your addiction was a huge value in your past self. What has been the most beneficial thing you've done in recovery, or maybe the top couple of things that have helped you to remove yourself from that equation, but also to accept yourself and live positively?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I have learned that self-care is not selfish, right? That I need to put the oxygen mask on myself first, right? I learned that that I need, in order, if I want to be of service to anybody, which is where like my value has started to come from, is that I need to take care of myself first. And when I'm, when I have my needs met, when I am able to, and what I mean is I acknowledge, process, and resolve negative feelings. And then I can go about my day being more positive. But it's very tempting to, the ego is not your amigo. The ego is all about what can I get, right? And when I'm in this space of what can I give, and it's very fearful, right? It's very small, it's very constricted. But when it's all about intention and attitude. If I can, just set aside, my wants, and, I address, of course, my needs first. But if I can move through my day with the intention of how can I serve, my day goes way different than on the days where I skip my morning practice and go right into doing. I love being a human doing, but it doesn't really serve me well. It's better to be a human being, which means about being heart-centered and feeling. I hope that answers the question. I tend to ramble.
No, that's good. And Corey actually has a follow-up a little bit about the ego. So maybe this will also help develop that a little bit more. He talks about, or asking, you mentioned that you had a hard time feeling like you were broken, or that something was wrong with you and that you were going to be good at being bad. Corey says, I can really relate with your statement on being good about being bad. How have you been able to reconcile who you are and accept yourself versus who others say you are through your recovery journey without feeding your ego? Or is it that the diet has changed?
I mean, it was like a really, okay. So the part about what other people think about. Okay. So he said something about being the brokenness. So that is something that I think a lot of alcoholics struggle with. This is the idea that we're broken. I'll just tell you, spoiler alert, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with me. We do tend to focus a little too much on character defects. I think in this program, it should be balanced out with assets too, right? We all have we do 1,000 things right every day. We tend to focus on the things that we don't do, quote unquote, right. I don't even like to live in that world of right and wrong. I like to I know what feels right or wrong in my gut. Like, does something bring me peace or do I feel funny about it? But that requires that I'm in touch with myself, right? As far as ego stuff goes, it's like, man, it doesn't matter how far down the road you go, you're still the same distance from the ditch. Like, we are really, I don't know how this is going to sound, but I'm 27 years sober, and I do a lot of service work, and people have this thing like, oh, wow. No, just save your oh, wow, because I still have all the same feelings everybody else does. Right. Like, some of the people that I've met with long-term recovery are batshit crazy. So length of time, amount of money, all the external things don't really reflect how you feel on the inside. It is a daily reprieve. And the ego is about external focus, what you can accomplish, what you can do, what you can display, who knows you, how many people. But the real peace comes from, what do I value about me? What can I connect with at a heart level? What feels right? And just kind of live heart centered. Like, follow your heart is kind of the easiest thing I can say, is follow your heart, because your heart won't steer you wrong.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have also witnessed that some people with a lot of sobriety are still very restless, irritable, discontented, as we read in there. And I always try to attract or to circle around people who, no matter their length of sobriety, are filled with that happy, joyous, and free that is there, because that's what I want. That's what I want. All right. So I have another question that I have here, and it kind of relates to the previous two questions. So you mentioned that that the alcohol was both your savior and your executioner. It saved you through your difficult years, teenage years and young adult years. How did you go about thanking your addict for saving you or bringing you through those hard years and moving on?
That's a great question. I went to therapy. I've done a lot of therapy. I love therapy. It's so good. I went to this therapist. Her specialty was process therapy. And that was when I really started to learn how to process feelings to resolution. And she did it by helping me to recognize that I have different facets inside myself. Right. And so the addiction really was trying, in a way, it sounds weird, but it was trying to save me. Your subconscious mind is always trying to protect you. Right. And so rather than feel the feelings that I didn't want to feel and I had no tools to process these feelings to resolution. Right. Because in my mind, I was always guilty and wrong. All roads lead to, it's my fault. I'm broken. Right. Like, in and of myself, that's where the logical conclusion is in my mind. And so I kind of lost my train of thought. But what she had me do in therapy was identify that I have different parts in myself. And she did have me do like this weirdo exercise where I spoke to the chair and thanked she's like, your addiction isn't in a chair, your whatever, your victim role, your victim self, can we have compassion for that piece? You know what my sponsor told me a long time ago? She kind of laid the gauntlet. She said, can you love your unlovable parts? And I was like, damn, that was like the biggest challenge I ever had. Can I love my unlovable parts? And here's why that's important, is because you cannot escape the same measuring stick that you judge others by. Right. And one of my favorite teachers, Brene Brown, talks about how empathy is the antidote to shame. And so as I learned to love and have empathy for my unlovable parts, they seem to soften. It's like, I'm not pushing them out. Pushing creates resistance, right? They say what you resist persists. And so as I push and resist like these parts that I feel like I hate about myself, I'm actually creating more resistance for them to leave. But when I have this open and loving heart to others and myself, the resistance naturally dissipates. But what you think about, you bring about. So I try to think of it in terms of what you focus on expands, right? So let's start focusing on our assets. We don't, acknowledge and process the negativity, but then let's move on. We don't have to live there. You don't have to live in this place where you're always recognizing your character defects and being in this horrible place of surrender. And that sounds just very painful. That doesn't sound like any fun to me. I don't think we were meant to live that way. We're a happy and joyous and free community, right? We like to have fun. So let's have some fun.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Arlina. I have one more question, and then we'll have you close out with some words of wisdom, and then we'll do the closing reading and move on with the rest of our day after the prayer. You mentioned a few personalities that came out when you drank. Did you do a similar practice with them, sit them in the chair with your therapist and talk to them, each of those different personalities? Have you addressed those types of things also in your recovery?
Yeah, we really did. That asked Betsy and Wimpy Wendy. The reason they even existed is because I didn't know how to process my feelings. Like I would stuff them. And then when I drank, I was like a volcano that just exploded. I had no emotion management tools. And that's what sobriety has given me, is emotion management tools. And so that's why those personalities developed, is because I wasn't giving them a voice. But when I drank, they would just come out. I was seeking to release that stress, and tears are not a bad thing. Tears are like, your pain melting and coming out of your body, and the fighting part, man, I still to this day, like my knee jerk is anger. If my feelings get hurt, I go to anger, even to this day. But I just recognize it a little sooner. And the prayer and meditation gives me a little bit of pause so that I'm not as reactive. But they say that anger is a sign of an unmet need. And so it takes me back to my self-care practice. I like to do the RAIN meditation. It's free on YouTube, Tara Brach. It stands for recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And that is literally my process for addressing and resolving pain on a daily basis. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. And one more question came in from Corey in our live audience. Corey says, as my wife and I have opened up about our recovery journey and how it's going, we have, of course, gotten mixed results from family and friends. Sure. What advice do you have for handling situations where people, out of love, want to tell you you're making a mistake by opening up?
Oh, by opening up? You don't share everything with everyone. There's certain, it depends on what's the motive for sharing. You don't have to tell everybody why you're not drinking. It's like, I'm just not drinking today. You can keep it simple. There are certain people that you'll get a sense of who is receptive. But the people who have a problem with you not drinking are the people who have a problem with their drinking. So just keep that in the back of your mind and keep yourself safe. You don't have to tell everybody everything. You can share little bits, and you can just test it. You can just ease into it. It doesn't always have to be, I'm an alcoholic. And you don't have to go there with these people who are incapable of responding in a way that would feel appropriate to you. And you can always ask for what you need. If you share something with somebody, you can be like, hey, I'm not looking for any feedback, or I just wanted to share this one little thing with you. Ask for what you need, No,
I really appreciate that. That's something that I've learned also in my journey, is that there are some people that it's none of their business. They're not on a need to know basis, what I'm dealing with. So, I really appreciate that feedback. That's good stuff. All right, let's go ahead and, do you have any final words of wisdom, Arlina, before we close out?
I'm afraid to answer that because I may never stop talking, because I'm just so grateful for this way of life. The consequences for me for not practicing this way of life are pretty severe. It is kind of a life or death situation. And that's kind of what it took to wake me up. And so I'm just so grateful that I have this process, and this life is amazing. I've been sober a long time. My kids have never seen me loaded. My husband and I have been married a long time. The program is great for resentment resolution in relationships. Resentment is a wedge that comes between people, and this is definitely a process to resolve it. So just super grateful for it.
Thank you so much, Arlina. That was a great RECO12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If we didn't get to your question, or if you have other questions, please go to RECO12.com/forum and join in our community and ask those questions and answer others' questions that will come up. I invite the audience to come back next week. If you've not yet gone to RECO12.com and submitted your email address there to get on the invitation list, please go do so that you can join us live each Friday at noon Central Time. Next week, we'll be hearing from Naika, whose topic will be being a multidisciplinary addict. And I'm looking forward to that one too. All right, now let's launch off into the rest of our day with the Lord's Prayer that Arlina has suggested, and I will be saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Amen. Keep coming back, everybody. It works when I work it. So work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching for glimmers of light, feet still on the ground. I can still be found, standing still.
My wings are torn and tattered, but I know I still can fly. I may not soar unfettered, I may not rise too high.
Recorded in the book of life and bind it with the seal